Every woman in the crystalline ballroom had spent a lifetime preparing to be chosen. Nia had spent hers learning how to disappear. She was the only one surprised when he stopped walking. Nia Hart had not. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. She was supposed to be in the hotel's service corridor, polishing champagne flutes until her knuckles ached. Invisible, the way she'd been for 8 months since she'd fled Los Angeles with nothing but a one-way ticket and a family secret she could never outrun. But the head hostess had taken ill, and someone needed to carry the champagne, and Nia's hands were steady, and nobody ever looked at her twice. So she stood near the back wall of the Blue Lotus Gala, in a borrowed black dress that felt more like a uniform than evening wear. Her sleek jet-black hair pulled into a center part that framed her face with goddess-like precision. A silver tray of crystal champagne flutes balanced against her hip. The ballroom was enormous. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support encourages us to bring more awesome stories. Your engagement helps us create more stories that celebrate resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. Thank you for being here, and thank you for believing that every person's story matters. White gold chandeliers hung overhead, casting geometric shadows across the gathered crowd. The air was thick with expensive perfume, oud and bergamot, and something rare Nia couldn't name, layered with the sharp fizz of cristal and the sweetness of white orchids arranged in jade vases. Nobles and heirs and syndicate leaders from every territory, all watching the raised platform at the center of the room, where 5 women stood in a perfect line. The choosing. It happened once a generation. When the heir to the Kang Empire reached his 30th year without taking a bride, the Council of Dragonhead selected 5 women from the highest bloodlines, the golden daughters of Seoul's 5 families, and presented them at the Blue Lotus Gala. The king would choose one. A strategic union sealed with a blood ceremony, and a contract signed under witness of every syndicate in the Pacific Rim. The 5 women were flawless. Lady Park Ji-yeon of the Northern District wore a gown of pale champagne silk that moved like liquid sunlight. Beside her, Lady Choi Soo-min of the East Side Shore stood in deep emerald green, her black hair swept into an elegant chignon that revealed a diamond collar worth more than Nia would earn in 10 lifetimes. Then Lady Han Ye-jin in ivory and gold, her face a study in porcelain perfection. Lady Yoon Da-hee in midnight blue embroidered with white cranes, symbols of longevity and power. And Lady Kim Min-ji, the youngest at 23, trembling slightly in a dress of blush pink that made her look like a watercolor painting come to life. They were perfect. Each one a carefully curated offering to the most powerful man in the Korean underworld. He walked in alone. Nia's breath caught before her mind could form a reason why. He was tall. That was the first thing. Taller than anyone she'd seen tonight. His shoulders and chest built in a way that spoke of raw, disciplined power rather than mere size. He wore a cream-colored suit tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his frame. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Even across the length of the ballroom, she could see them. Intense, steady, dark brown, almost black, with a focus that made the air feel thinner. They swept the room with a calm, assessing precision that made every person in that space feel catalogued, evaluated, and dismissed in the span of a heartbeat. This was not a man who entered a room. He claimed it. The space around him seemed to compress, to orient itself toward him, the way a compass needle swings to magnetic north. And every person in that ballroom felt it, leaned toward it, lowered their gaze. Kang Min-jae, the king. Nia had heard his name 1,000 times, whispered in the hotel staff break rooms, spoken with reverence in the corridors by the security detail who worked the Kang properties. He'd taken control of the Kang Empire at 25, after his father's sudden death. We had held it for 5 years against rival syndicates and border wars, and a political landscape that shifted like Seoul's monsoon seasons. They said he was ruthless. They said he was fair. They said he'd once ended a territorial dispute by walking into the rival boss's compound unarmed and emerging 3 hours later with a signed treaty and the other man's unconditional respect. He couldn't have seen her. Not really. Not in the shadows. In a borrowed black dress, holding a champagne tray. She was nothing. She was furniture. But something in her chest pulled. A sharp, bright tug behind her sternum, like a thread she didn't know existed, had been yanked taut. Her hand tightened on the tray. Her pulse kicked hard against her throat. She looked away. On the platform, the 5 women straightened as Min-jae approached. The Council of Dragonheads stood in their ceremonial hanbok of black silk and white trim. 3 men and 2 women whose faces were carved with lines deeper than the foundation of the building itself. And the eldest of them, a woman called Elder Song, stepped forward with her hands raised. "Kang Min-jae," Elder Song said, her voice carrying through the silent ballroom with the clarity of a struck crystal glass. "The 5 families have offered their finest daughters for your consideration. Each carries the bloodline, the education, and the grace befitting a queen of the Kang Empire. You may speak with each. You may take the evening to decide, or you may choose now. The decision is yours, and yours alone." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was the moment they'd all come for. Min-jae stopped at the base of the platform. He didn't climb the steps. He stood there, hands in his pockets in a gesture so casual it bordered on disrespectful, and looked at the 5 women with an expression Nia couldn't read from her position against the wall. Not disinterest exactly, something heavier, something that looked almost like exhaustion. Lady Park Ji-yeon smiled at him, confident, practiced, beautiful in the way magazine covers were beautiful. Lady Choi Soo-min met his gaze steadily, her posture perfect, her diamond collar glittering. Lady Han Ye-jin executed a flawless bow, fluid as water. Lady Yoon Da-hee lowered her lashes in a gesture of demure invitation. Lady Kim Min-ji looked like she might faint. Min-jae said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched. The chandeliers sparkled. The champagne bubbles rose and popped in 1,000 crystal flutes. Then he turned away from the platform. The murmur became a gasp. Nia watched his face as he stepped down from the dais, and she saw something shift behind those dark eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition, like a compass needle swinging to true north. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared slightly, and then he was moving. Not toward the council, not toward the doors, not toward any of the syndicate families clustered in their designer finery along the edges of the room. He was walking toward the back wall, toward her. Nia's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she felt it in her teeth. No, he wasn't. He couldn't be. She glanced behind her, expecting to see someone important, someone who mattered, but there was nothing behind her except glass and shadow and a massive white orchid arrangement on a marble pedestal. She looked back, and he was closer. 10 strides away. 8. 5. His eyes were locked on hers and they were burning. Those dark, steady eyes, burning with something that looked like fury and wonder and inevitability, all tangled together. The champagne flutes trembled on her tray. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat, close enough that she could smell him, something expensive and deep like sandalwood and leather, mixed with something underneath that was purely, overwhelmingly him. The entire ballroom was staring. "What is your name?" His voice was low, controlled at the edges like velvet wrapped around steel. He wasn't asking because he was curious. He was asking because he already knew the answer mattered more than anything else he'd been told tonight. Nia opened her mouth, closed it. Her throat was dry. "I'm no one," she managed. I'm just serving the champagne. Something flickered across his face. Not amusement exactly. Something warmer. Something almost tender. That's not what I asked. She felt the weight of 300 stares pressing into her back. Nia, she whispered. My name is Nia Hart. He said it back to her. Nia. And the way he said it, low and deliberate, like it was a word he'd been searching for his entire life, made something crack open inside her chest. He turned to face the ballroom. Every eye was on them. The 5 women on the platform stood frozen, their carefully composed faces beginning to fracture. The council looked stricken. Elder Song's mouth was open, her ceremonial fan gripped in white-knuckled hands. I've made my choice, Min-jae said. His voice filled the ballroom without effort, deep and absolute. The voice of a man who had never once been disobeyed. Her. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the chaos began. Nia had expected interrogation, maybe even threats. What she hadn't expected was the silence. Min-jae's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Kang Tower, and calling it a home felt wrong. It was a statement. Glass and steel and space so vast it swallowed sound. The living room alone could fit her entire Los Angeles apartment 6 times over. White leather furniture sat arranged like pieces on a chessboard. Abstract art that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime hung on walls the color of storm clouds. Everything was clean lines and cold perfection, designed to intimidate. She stood in the center of it all, still in her borrowed black dress, still holding herself like she might need to run. Sit, Min-jae said, shrugging out of his cream jacket and draping it over a chair. He'd been silent during the entire ride-up, his security team flanking them in the private elevator, their faces blank as marble. Now they were alone. Nia didn't sit. Why am I here? Because I asked you to be. He moved to a bar cart, poured 2 glasses of something amber. And because leaving the gala on your own would have been dangerous. Dangerous for who? You. He crossed the room, offered her a glass. When she didn't take it, he set it on the table beside her. The families don't take rejection well. Lady Park's father controls half the port traffic in Busan. Lady Choi's mother runs the largest pharmaceutical network in East Asia. You humiliated their daughters in front of the entire syndicate. That makes you a problem. I didn't do anything, Nia said, her voice sharper than she intended. You did. Something flickered in his eyes, almost amusement. True. He moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out over Seoul. The city glittered below them like scattered diamonds, endless and cold. Nia watched him, trying to reconcile the man who'd walked through that ballroom like a king with the one standing here now. Shoulders slightly whirled. What happens when his woman is touched? Relax, Min-jae murmured near her ear. You look like you're about to be executed. I'm deciding if that would be better than this. His mouth curved, almost a smile. They'd nearly reached their table when a voice cut through the low hum of conversation. Kang Min-jae, and his American acquisition. The man who spoke was in his 50s, silver-haired, expensive suit. Face Nia didn't recognize, but Min-jae clearly did. His hand at her back went still. Park Jun-ho, Min-jae said, his voice perfectly neutral. Jun-ho's smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked at Nia the way someone might examine a counterfeit bill. I have to admit, I'm fascinated by your choice. Tell me, does she even speak Korean? Or is the appeal purely visual? The temperature in the room dropped. Min-jae moved so fast Nia barely tracked it. One moment he was beside her, and the next he had Jun-ho against the wall, forearm across the older man's throat, his voice deadly quiet. Say another word about her, and I'll make sure you never speak again. Nia couldn't sleep. The guest room Minjae had given her was larger than any space she'd ever called her own. Silk sheets, windows that overlooked the city like a throne room view, a bathroom with marble she was afraid to touch. But luxury didn't quiet the noise in her head. The chaos of the gala, the weight of 300 stairs, the way he'd said her name like it meant something. She'd fled to the one thing that had kept her sane through 8 months of hiding, through years of her mother's illness, through every moment she'd felt like drowning. Prayer. She knelt on the plush carpet in the center of the room, barefoot, still wearing the simple black dress because she had nothing else. Her hands folded, her eyes closed, her voice a whisper in the dark. Father, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know why he chose me. But if this is part of your plan... I didn't mean to interrupt. Her eyes snapped open. Minjae stood in the doorway, still in his white shirt and dress pants, the top buttons undone, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked different without the jacket. Less king, more man. Still dangerous, but softer somehow in the low light. I saw your light on, he said. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. Nia's heart was racing, but she didn't stand. Didn't move. I'm fine. He should have left. Should have nodded and disappeared back into whatever part of this fortress he occupied. Instead, he stayed in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin warm. You're praying, he said. Not a question, an observation. Yes. I didn't know you were religious. You don't know anything about me. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Minjae was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped into the room. Not close. Just past the threshold. You're right. I don't. Nia watched him, wary. Does that bother you? That the woman you chose believes in something you can't control? His mouth curved. Not quite a smile. No. It terrifies me. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. He moved closer, slow enough that she could tell him to stop. When he didn't speak, didn't push, just stood there like he was waiting for permission, Nia heard herself say something she hadn't planned. You can join me. And if you want. Minjae went very still. I don't know how. You kneel, Nia said softly, and you talk to God like he's listening. Because he is. For a long moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd laugh or walk away, or remind her that men like him didn't bow to anyone. But then he lowered himself to the carpet beside her, movements careful, uncertain. His shoulder almost touched hers. I haven't prayed since I was a child, he said quietly. My father believed in gods of iron and blood, power you could see, control you could hold. And what do you believe in? He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was so raw it stole her breath. Right now, I believe in you. Nia's throat tightened. She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, like he'd been waiting for the touch, starving for it. Then let's pray together, she whispered. They bowed their heads. And in the silence of that room, with the city glittering below and the night pressing in around them, the King of Soul's underworld prayed beside a woman who'd taught him that some things were more powerful than empires. When they finished, neither of them let go. Nia found him on the terrace at 2 a.m. She'd woken to an empty bed, the sheets still warm where he'd been lying beside her. 3 weeks of living in the penthouse had taught her his patterns, the late-night calls to associates in different time zones, the silent pacing when a deal went wrong, the way he disappeared when the weight of the empire pressed too hard against his chest. Tonight felt different. He stood at the edge of the terrace, one hand braced against the glass railing, the Seoul skyline spreading below him like a sea of electric light. He'd pulled on black pants but nothing else, his bare back turned to her, and even from here she could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. You should be sleeping, he said without turning around. So should you. Nia stepped out into the cool night air, the silk robe she'd borrowed, his, really, far too big on her, trailing behind her like water. What's wrong? Nothing. Min Jae. He turned then, and the look on his face made her breath catch. Not anger. Something rawer. Something that looked like exhaustion that had been building for 5 years and finally found a crack to bleed through. Elder Song called, he said quietly. The Northern District wants a formal apology. Park's father is threatening to pull his backing from the port expansion unless I... He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. It matters to you. What matters is keeping the empire stable. His voice was flat, the same tone he used in boardrooms when negotiating deals worth hundreds of millions. What matters is making sure the families stay in line, the territories stay peaceful, and the money keeps moving. That's what my father left me. That's what I'm responsible for. Nia moved closer, close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Is that all you are? Responsible? Something flickered across his face. He turned back to the skyline. I was 25 when my father died. A car accident, they said. Clean. Quick. Unavoidable. His hand tightened on the railing. It wasn't an accident. The words landed quietly, but Nia felt them like a punch to the chest. The Kim family wanted control of the northern routes. Min Jae continued, his voice steady, clinical, like he was reciting a report. My father refused. 3 days later, his brakes failed on the Gangnam Expressway. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. He paused. I was in Paris, closing a real estate deal. I should have been here. Min Jae. I came back to a council that thought I was too young. Rivals who thought I was too soft. Families who'd been waiting for my father to die so they could carve up his territory like a feast. He turned to face her fully now, and his eyes were dark, burning with something that might have been rage or grief, or both. I had 2 choices. Prove I was strong enough to hold what he built, or watch everything he died for disappear. So you proved it, Nia said softly. I destroyed them. He said it simply, factually. The Kim family lost their shipping license within a month. Their warehouses burned. Their associates disappeared. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't have to. I just made sure everyone knew that touching the Kang Empire meant losing everything they'd ever built. His jaw tightened. And then, I did it again. And again. Every time someone tested me. Every time someone thought I was weak. Nia's throat ached. That's not weakness, that's survival. Is it? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked like doubt. Sometimes I look at what I've become, and I don't recognize it. My father was ruthless, but he was fair. People respected him. Why they fear me? He paused. There's a difference. They respect you too, Nia said. I've seen it. The way your lieutenants talk about you. The way the staff here moves when you walk through a room. That's not just fear. You don't know what I've done. Then show me. The words hung between them for a long moment. Then slowly, Min Jae reached up and turned, presenting his back to her fully. In the silver moonlight she could see them. Faint scars, 3 of them, running in parallel lines across his left shoulder blade. Old, healed, but unmistakable. A rival syndicate, he said quietly. 2 years ago. They sent an assassin to a charity gala. He got close enough to put a knife in my back before my security took him down. His voice was even, almost detached. I finished my speech before I let them take me to the hospital. Had to. Couldn't let anyone see me bleed. Nia's hand moved before she could stop it, fingers tracing the raised tissue gently. She felt him tense under her touch, then slowly relax. There are more, he said. He turned, took her hand and pressed it against his ribs on the right side. She could feel it under her palm, a ridge of scar tissue, maybe 3 inches long. Nia's throat was tight. She didn't pull her hand away. "I don't tell you this for pity," Minjai said, his voice low. "I tell you because you should know what you're standing beside. What people will do to get to me. What they'll do to you. I'm not afraid. You should be. I know." She looked up at him, met those dark eyes that had burned through her defenses from the moment he'd crossed that ballroom. "I'm still not leaving." Something shifted in his expression. The armor cracked. And then he was kissing her. One hand cupping her face, the other sliding into her hair. And it wasn't the controlled, deliberate intensity of their first nights together. It was raw, desperate. Like he was holding on to the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to tear him apart. Nia kissed him back with everything she had, her hands sliding up his bare chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering under her palms. He tasted like whiskey and want and something darker, like a man who'd spent 5 years carrying a mountain and finally found someone willing to stand under it with him. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead dropped to hers. "Tell me something," he murmured. "Something true. Something you've never told anyone." Nia's chest tightened. She'd been waiting for this, dreading it, knowing it would come. "My mother," she said quietly, "was a professional liar." Minjay pulled back just enough to look at her, his expression unreadable. "She was beautiful," Nia continued, her voice steady even as her hands trembled slightly. "The kind of beautiful that made men stupid. And she used it. Con jobs mostly. She'd meet a rich man, make him fall in love with her, and then she'd disappear with whatever she could carry. Jewelry. Cash. Wire transfers if she could manage it." She swallowed hard. "I grew up in hotel rooms and rented apartments. Never stayed anywhere longer than 6 months. She taught me how to blend in, how to be invisible when you needed to be, how to read people. And then she ran a con on the wrong man." Nia's voice cracked, just slightly. "Someone connected. Someone with resources. I was 17. She told me to pack a bag and run. Said she'd find me when it was safe." She closed her eyes. I never saw her again. Minjay's hand found hers, laced their fingers together. He didn't speak. "I survived," Nia said. "Worked whatever jobs I could find. Stayed invisible like she taught me. And then, 8 months ago, someone found me. One of the men she'd stolen from. He said I owed him what she'd taken. Said if I didn't pay, he'd make sure I disappeared the same way she did." Her throat was tight. "So I ran. Bought a one-way ticket to Seoul because it was far and I didn't know anyone and I thought maybe I could disappear for real this time." "The hostess job," Minjay said quietly. "The hostess job." Nia opened her eyes, looked at him. "I took it because I needed money, because I thought if I could save enough, I could disappear again. Keep running forever if I had to." She paused. "And then you walked across that ballroom and looked at me like you'd been searching for me your whole life, and I didn't want to run anymore." His grip on her hand tightened. "I'm not like those women on that platform," Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have a bloodline or an education or any grace at all. I'm the daughter of a con artist and a ghost. I don't know how to be a queen." "Good," Minjay said, and his voice was fierce, burning with something that made her chest ache. "Because I don't need a queen. I need someone who understands what it means to survive, someone who knows how to stand in the shadows and still refuse to disappear." He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I need you, Nia. Exactly as you are." And then he was kissing her again, slower this time, achingly tender. And Nia felt something inside her chest crack wide open, something that had been locked and buried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. He lifted her, carried her back inside, and they fell into bed together, like two people who'd been fighting gravity for too long and finally decided to let go. His hands were reverent, tracing every curve of her body like he was memorizing her. Her fingers explored the landscape of his scars, the stories written on his skin that he'd never told anyone else. When he moved inside her, it wasn't just desire, it was recognition. Two people who'd been carved by the same knife, forged in the same fire, finally finding someone who understood the weight they carried. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dim light, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing slow circles on her back. "My father used to say," Min-jae murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion and something softer, "that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire." "Sounds like something a mafia boss would say," Nia said, and felt his chest rumble with quiet laughter. He also said that the man who finds someone willing to stand in the fire with him is the richest man alive. His arms tightened around her. I didn't understand what he meant until now. Nia closed her eyes, let herself sink into the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under her ear. For the first time in 8 months, maybe for the first time in her entire life, she felt safe. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered. "Good," he whispered back, "because I'm not letting you go." They weren't the king and the outsider anymore. They were partners. Equals. Two people building a new standard for what love and business and transformation could look like when you were brave enough to try. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support encourages us to bring more awesome stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that true power isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to live with dignity and grace. Your engagement helps us create more stories that celebrate resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. Thank you for